Hello, Dr. Yates and my fellow classmates. I will be presenting my project on Duns Scotus' thought on angelic knowledge. One may raise two important questions regarding the medieval theory of angelic knowledge. First, one may wonder, what is the object of angelic intelligence? The second question that one may raise is concerned with what are the means for angelic intelligence? Exploring the topic of angelic knowledge allows for philosophers to reflect on the limits set on human understanding by sense and imagination when contrasted with the angelic case. Some philosophers raise methodological difficulties when it comes to the angels. Some claim that there is no evidence for their existence. A second claim may be that angels have no explanatory role in contemporary theories. Or finally, a third claim may be that angels are not talked about in contemporary philosophy. In this presentation, we will look at how medieval theologians discussed and defended positions that contradict claims 1 and 2. It is interesting to note that there's a distinction between the angelic knowledge that is found in the good angels versus that in which is found in the fallen angels. This presentation will focus on the knowledge that is found in the good angels. Even though a lot of what was discussed in the medieval times about angelic knowledge was speculative in nature, it was all rooted in epistemology. Therefore, the claims that they came up with were not absurd. My presentation is broken up into 5 main sections. The order of the issues to be considered include angelic knowledge of other creatures in Section 1. In Section 2, we will look at angelic self-knowledge. In Section 3, we will look at angelic distinct and natural knowledge of God. In Section 4, we will take a look at angelic progress in natural knowledge. And finally, in Section 5, I will reflect on Scotus' own inventiveness. I will add that this format follows the structure that is laid out in Timothy Noon's paper that is entitled Duns Scotus on Angelic Knowledge. This project is mostly a synthesis of his work, and I was highly influenced by his paper. This material is very tough, so I encourage you to read his paper for a more concrete study on the matter. Before I jump into the main sections of my project, I would like to give a quick review of what we went over in Lesson 3 concerning epistemology and medieval philosophy. The scholastic period raised different notions of the proper object of the intellect. Henry of Ghent held that the proper object of the intellect was God. This notion differed from St. Thomas, who held that the proper object of the intellect is the material world. Blessed John Duns Scotus did not agree with either of these positions, but held that the proper object of the intellect is being qua being. Scotus' doctrine on the univocal concept of being allows for univocity for both the creator and the created. One can reason that this position is correct insofar as it does not dismantle Aristotelian ontology, but solves issues from both Aquinas and Henry of Ghent. It is hard for God to be the primary object of the intellect, insofar as God cannot be contained in one's intellect. One does not have access to the divine essence. Likewise, it would be hard for the quiddity of material substances to be the proper object of the intellect, because the essences of material things do not contain within them all that human beings seek to know. Rational animals seek to know the ultimate causes of things. St. Thomas's analogy of being only posits that a material being is analogous to the spiritual being of God. Scotus does not deny the analogy of being, but uses the univocal concept of being to defend the analogy of being. Thus, it is right to say that Scotus' argument for univocity does not rule out the possibility of an analogical predication. One example of Scotus' use of both analogy and univocity instead of pure analogy alone would be his notion of the concept of wisdom. For Scotus, there is a concept of wisdom that can apply to both God and intellectual creatures. The wisdom that is proper to creatures is finite and qualitative. The wisdom that is proper to God is formally infinite. The two concepts have a plurality of components that diverge, but each contains the identical component, i.e., the simple, univocal concept of wisdom. The same thing can be said of all analogical concepts. They diverge in some of their components, but at the root lies a simple univocal component that they share. This shows that analogy is possible only because of univocity. Likewise, Scotus do not fall into the epistemological problems of many Augustinians who have a hard time descending from the knowledge of God to material beings. When Scotus holds that being qua being is the proper object of the intellect, he has an unambiguous account of how one can know both God and creatures, i.e., a conceptual univocity between God and creatures. Thus, when Scotus develops the intuition of being as the formal object of the intellect, he distinguishes between the natures of being, the notions of ens, esse, essentia, and existentia. Scotus was also very sympathetic to Henry of Ghent's goal of maintaining that being is univocal without throwing out the concept is also analogical. We will see this in the next slide as we jump into angelic knowledge. In order to lay the background for Scotus's own views, he starts by summarizing the position of Henry of Ghent and Thomas Aquinas. Henry rejects impressed intelligible species, both in the case of human beings and in the angels. In doing so, he posits instead a means of cognition that he calls a habitus scientialis. This type of habit shows how an angel can acquire the ability to think at will the many objects that are present to his intellect through the habit in question. One can argue that this view of angelic cognition is plausible. It is plausible because of the place angels occupy in the hierarchy of substances, i.e., the highest perfection of the lower reality borders upon the features of higher realities. Henry differed from Aquinas and others by preferring to call the angels' cognitive devices habits rather than species. Regarding the means of conveying angelic knowledge, Scotus and Aquinas are in agreement insofar as they both posit species to explain angelic knowledge of other created things. Aquinas claims Neoplatonic principles found in sources like Liber de Cagis and in the thought of Pseudo-Dionysius. He claims that angels at a higher place in the hierarchy need fewer species than those in a lower place in the hierarchy. The Thomistic understanding of angelic individuality is rooted in the Neoplatonic tradition and utilizes Aristotelian metaphysics. Aquinas argues for the aforementioned claim by articulating that the closer an intelligence is to the first, the more powerful, more immaterial, and more actual its intellect is. Thus, the more powerful, more immaterial, and more actual its intellect, the more perfect its means of knowing must be. In week 2, we discussed the nature of Platonism, Aristotelianism, and skepticism. A lot of Thomists believe that Aquinas' thought is somehow divorced from Neoplatonism. As we have just seen, this idea is patently false. Aquinas articulates that the species in the angels placed higher in the hierarchy are metaphysically individual entities, but represent an ever greater number of things, at least virtually speaking. Aquinas recognizes the Aristotelian notion of immaterial substances. Aquinas thus deduces that the notion of a perfect universe necessarily posits that there must be intellectual, immaterial creatures between humans and God. We will now transition to Scotus's own view, one species per intelligible. Scotus's own position is that there are as many intelligible species in the angelic intellect covering created items other than the angel as there are such intelligibles to know, no matter where an angel is placed in the hierarchy. Regarding Scotus's question about angelic knowledge of created things, he does not ask whether an angel knows things other than itself through its essence. Scotus asks whether an angel knows created essences through the distinct and proper means of knowing such essences. Scotus discusses how one may think that due to the hierarchy of angelic substances, that the angels that are higher up within the hierarchy contain in their nature the properties of the lower angels, and hence they would not require, apart from their own essences, proper means of knowledge for knowing lower things. One can reduce the arguments against angelic self-knowledge to three principal points. The first argument consists of the claim that actual intelligibility of the angelic essence to the angelic mind is insufficient to guarantee actual self-knowledge. The second argument consists in the metaphysical principle that nothing can act upon itself, which rules out angelic knowledge, since this would entail the angel moving from potency to act. The third and final argument consists in the claim that if an angel could know itself through its own essence, this could mean that there is identification with the angelic essence with its activity, which is a feature that only belongs to God. Aquinas on angelic self-knowledge without a species. According to Scotus, Thomas's theory of angelic self-knowledge revolves around two principles. The first principle consists of the distinction between transitive and imminent action. The second is a distinction between a cognitive power enjoying actual knowledge as opposed to potential knowledge. Thus, Aquinas would argue that the essence of an angel might function as the means for angelic self-knowledge. One objection that Scotus lodges against the Thomistic view is concerned with the role of the species. Aquinas' theory seems to presume that the only role of the species is as a principle of actualization. Another way to put it is that of rendering the intellect in a state of actuality as opposed to potentiality. Scotus expresses how this overlooks the dimension of cognitive determination. This next slide we will turn to Scotus's account on angelic self-knowledge. May we keep in mind the three aforementioned arguments against angelic self-knowledge as we turn to Scotus. Scotus's own position on angelic self-knowledge has three key factors involved in cognition. The three key factors include the means of knowledge, the knowing subject, and the intelligible object. The means of knowledge is to be understood as the first actualization of the understanding in the order of causation. In this general framework, Scotus tries to locate the distinct features of angelic self-knowledge by reviewing features found in human knowledge. Scotus then draws similarities and differences between the two. One of the most important distinctions is between intuitive and abstractive cognition. Abstractive cognition resides from the actual existence and presence of the objects. Intuitive cognition bears upon things that are actually existent and is one of the human intellect's inherent capacities. We will take a further look at this distinction in the next slide. The distinction between intuitive and abstractive cognition for Scotus is fundamental for understanding his epistemology. Scotus believes that an angel can know itself through its essence, insofar as the essence can serve as the means of knowing on the side of the intelligible. At first sight, this may seem very similar to the thought of Aquinas. However, the distinction from the Thomistic position consists in the angelic essence as a principle of knowledge on the part of the intelligible. Scotus views the angelic essence as a principle of knowledge on the part of the angelic intellect. Thus for Scotus, the essence of the angel in its presence to the angelic mind cooperates with that mind to produce the act of knowledge. Secondly, the essence of the angel must function as the proper means of understanding. In this way, Scotus differs from Aquinas insofar as Scotus's position holds that the angel's mode of cognition is intuition. Third, the essence of the angel is more perfect as a principle of knowledge than a species would be. The angelic essence is a proper means for the angel to know itself. It is not the precise cause of the angel's self-knowledge. In the next slide, we will take a further look of Scotus's distinction between intuitive and abstractive cognition. We will see how this pertains to the knowledge of God for Scotus. Scotus's own theory of angelic natural knowledge of God relies on the distinction between intuitive and abstractive cognition. Intuitive cognition for Scotus is the direct and unmediated cognition apprehension and refers to both the senses and intellect. Quote, abstractive cognition for Scotus is a term that refers to any mode of awareness of a thing or feature of a thing that functions equally well in the presence or absence of the item. Unquote. Abstractive intellectual knowledge is the first knowledge one engages in by abstracting intelligible features of sensibly perceived items communicated to the intellect through the phantasm, but not actually abstracted until the agent intellect exercises its function. Scotus would say that one can find knowledge about the real world from causal judgments from experience about the external world. Sense experience can also help one to reach knowledge about the real world if carefully examined in the intellect. This distinction can be seen in Scotus's Ordinatio when he says, quote, so too, when a sensible item is present to a sense power, two kinds of cognition can be caused through the power of that sensible experience. One is abstractive cognition, whereby the agent intellect abstracts the species of equidity or essence from the species in the phantasm, which, i.e., the species of the quiddity, represents its object absolutely and not as it exists now and then. The other that can occur is an intuitive cognition in the intellect, whereby the object cooperates with the mind inasmuch as the object exists. Unquote. Angels do not have natural intuitive cognition of the divine essence, insofar as this knowledge constitutes their beatitude, which is beyond the scope of their natural powers. Abstractive cognition could be understood to function in three different ways. The first way consists by means of the nature of the knower itself. The second way consists through the knowing nature when combined with the relevant, external, active and passive causal factors. And finally, the third way, through neither the nature alone nor the nature combined with external causal factors, but through something concrete with the nature. Angels cannot know anything in the first way, insofar as that would exclude the role for the object, and this would only allow for the angels to know themselves. The second way does not work either. The second way would be the category into which one would place ordinary human acts of sensitive and intellectual cognition. Angels cannot know God distinctly in this case, because their essence gives them no means for such knowledge. Thus, only the third possibility is left, that is, that angels know God through a natural endowed means. This natural endowed means can be described according to Scotus as an intelligible species. In the next slide, we will refer back to the medieval epistemology of Henry of Ghent, who considers the proper object of the intellect as God. We will then take a look at the tenability of the species theory which he presents. If you would like to dive deeper into the thought of the distinction between intuitive and abstractive cognition in Blessed John Duns Scotus, I refer you to another one of Dr. Timothy Noon's papers entitled Of Angels and Men, Sketches from High Medieval Epistemology. The paper is very good and gives a very good description of this distinction. The substance of the angel, according to Henry of Ghent, is more akin to God insofar as he is a substance than species is. However, not even the angelic essence can represent the divine essence. In this way, one can see Henry's epistemology in his account of the first object known in human cognition, that God is the actual object known. Henry thus proposes that God is known through his sui generis presence in the mind. This sui generis presence is even more direct than a species. Now that we understand Henry of Ghent's species theories in relation to the natural knowledge of God, may we turn to the progress of natural knowledge in the angels. Scotus does not pose a question on the progress of natural knowledge in the angels, and it was not well discussed in the 14th century. Scotus versus Aquinas on an angelic agent intellect. Dr. Timothy Noon strikingly notes that Thomas Aquinas had allowed for the possibility that the angels had agent intellects in his early commentary on Peter Lombard's sentences, but in the Summa Theologiae he discounted this hypothesis. Angelic intelligences are never in potency with respect to natural knowledge in the thought of Aquinas. The proximate thought of the angels is always actual and present to them in their form of their own essences. Another distinction can be made in the Thomistic thought that the angelic intelligences are in potency with respect to knowledge that pertains to the supernatural order. With this in mind, we can analyze how Scotus understands Aquinas' argumentation. Scotus understands Aquinas' argumentation with the following reasoning. 1. If an angel receives knowledge from sensibles, the species of such things are abstracted through an agent intellect. 2. If the species of such things are abstracted through an agent intellect, an angel has an agent intellect. 3. If an angel has an agent intellect, angelic natures have to do with potential intelligibles. 4. The intermediate conclusion. If angels receive knowledge from sensibles, angelic natures have to do with potential intelligibles. 5. But angelic natures do not have to do with potential intelligibles, since all of their intelligibles are actually present to them. 6. Hence, angels do not receive knowledge from sensibles, i.e., the contradictory of the ultimate antecedent of the pure hypothetical syllogism. Scotus gives his own counterproof by reducing the aforementioned complex chain to the following simple inference and claims that Aquinas is committed to the warrant of the inference. Scotus claims if an angel has a possible and agent intellect, then it is capable of receiving knowledge from sensible things. I again refer you to Dr. Timothy Noon's paper entitled Duns Scotus on Angelic Knowledge for more insight on how Scotus was able to simplify Aquinas' argument to the aforementioned reasoning. Scotus follows a tradition in the line of Franciscan thinkers who posit a wider conception of the ancient intellect as a perfection of finite intelligences. They also posit that finite intellects have to do with potential intelligibility. Scotus calls upon a metaphysical principle in the late 13th century that is very prevalent in Franciscan psychology. This principle includes whatever is a mark or feature within a lower power or substance must be posited as belonging also to a high power or substance. Again, I refer you to Dr. Timothy Noon's paper to really understand how Scotus was able to simplify those 6 premises down into one major claim against Aquinas. The 3 ways in which angelic knowledge progresses, according to Scotus, include the actual knowledge of the singular thing by the angel, the actual knowledge of the existence of the thing, and finally intuitive cognition of the thing, since in fact not all cognition of something in its actual existence is intuitive cognition according to Scotus. When one considers Scotus's position of angels acquiring knowledge from things directly from their own intellectual powers, one may rightly call to mind the medieval discussions on angelic knowledge that occurred 50 years prior to Scotus. For example, in the 1250s and 1260s, one can find the thought of Saint Bonaventure, who also posited agent and possible intellects in angels. However, one can argue that even though Scotus's thought is similar to Saint Bonaventure and other thinkers like Richard Rufus, Scotus's approach is yet distinctive and inventive. Scotus not only synthesizes existing elements, but creates new elements. 13th century discussions focused upon species, whether angels knew created things through innate or acquired species. Discussion also pertained to how these species covered universals and particulars, or just simply universals. Scotus argues for an immediate intellectual awareness of individuals and natures not mediated by species in his doctrine of intuitive cognition. Bonaventure also speaks of knowledge on the part of the angels without intermediation of species. Bonaventure does not call this angelic type of cognition intuitive cognition. There is a strong reason to think that Bonaventure had a big influence on Scotus's notion of intuitive cognition of individuals and their natures. A very good description of Saint Bonaventure and the angels is found in the first sketch of Dr. Timothy Noon's paper entitled "Of Angels and Men, Sketches from High Medieval Epistemology." There is a relevant importance between angelic cognition in relation to philosophical discussions of human knowledge. Scotus's defense of intelligible species shows the importance in the role of species determining the object of cognition. Also, Scotus articulates how the role of the agent intellect is not limited to abstracting intelligibles from phantasms, i.e., in the traditional Aristotelian account, that is, but also includes isolating intelligible aspects of things so as to think about those features distinctly. What emerges from Scotus's discussion of angels is a theory of the mind that is meant to cover intellectual knowledge in angels and humans. This is well put when Dr. Timothy Noon says, quote, "What we might say most generally is that Scotus's gnoseology of angels is a step in the direction of a unified philosophy of mind, as opposed to maintaining distinct epistemologies for angels and humans." Unquote. To recap the main points of this presentation, we first considered the proper object of the intellect for Scotus to be being qua being. Scotus's view of angelic knowledge of other creatures includes one species per intelligible. Scotus's own position on angelic self-knowledge has three factors involved in cognition: the means of knowledge, the knowing subject, and the intelligible object. Scotus's own theory of angelic natural knowledge of God relies on this distinction between intuitive and abstractive cognition. Scotus posits three ways in which angelic knowledge progresses: the actual knowledge for the singular thing by the angel, the actual knowledge for the existence of the thing, and finally intuitive cognition of the thing, since in fact not all cognition of something in its actual existence is intuitive cognition according to Scotus. In Scotus's doctrine of intuitive cognition, he argues for an immediate intellectual awareness of individuals and natures, not mediated by species. One can apply Scotus's epistemology on angels as a unified philosophy of mind. This is opposed to maintaining distinct epistemologies for angels and humans. Overall, I just want to thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned a thing or two about Duns Scotus on angelic knowledge, and please feel free to email me if you have any questions. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.